Welcome to ILTV Security Brief. I'm Kalev Ben-David. Each week, we focus on the latest developments and security and defense relating to Israel and the Middle East, impacting on this region and beyond. And we start with our top items of the past week. The IDF expands its ground operation in Gaza, killing 2 Hamas commanders as troops prepare to seize control of Khan Yunis. Reserves Master Sergeant Alon Farkas is shot dead during combat in Gaza City, and 3 soldiers, Staff Sergeants Lior Steinberg, Ofek Barhana, and Omer Van Gelder, are killed by a roadside bomb in North Gaza's Jabalia, the worst single casualty incident so far in Operation Gideon's Chariot. The IDF recovers the remains of Gad Chagai and Judith Weinstein, who were murdered in kibbutz near Oz by Hamas terrorists in the October 7th attack, and their bodies taken into Gaza. This after Hamas rejects the latest U.S. proposal for a hostage deal. American NGO Gaza Humanitarian Fund says its operation to provide aid to residents is proving successful despite efforts by Hamas to disrupt and discredit the effort. The IDF denies reports from Gaza sources that it opened fire on Palestinian civilians approaching the aid center in Rafah, saying any such clashes occurred with terror suspects well outside the facility. President Trump says Iran will not be allowed to enrich any uranium under a U.S. agreement, contradicting reports that his negotiators presented a proposal that would enable limited enrichment for civilian use. Iran is reportedly repairing and boosting its air defense systems in the event the current talks fail. Yemen's Houthi rebels continue to fire missiles at Israel on an almost daily basis. And for the first time in a year, 2 rockets are launched from Syria at Israeli territory in the Golan Heights. All are intercepted by air defense systems. The IDF responds to the Syria launches with airstrikes and artillery fire and says the country's new government must be held responsible for the incident. Exports from Israel's defense industries reached a record high of over $14.7 billion in 2024, a 13% increase over the previous year. This according to the Defense Ministry, which says over 50% of the deals were with European countries, and that missile, rocket, and air defense systems comprised nearly half of the orders. And now the big story. War is diplomacy by other means, said the Prussian military analyst Karl von Clausewitz. But for Israel, war and diplomacy have become inextricably intertwined. This is especially so as it applies to Israel's most important ally, and perhaps its only true remaining one, the United States. A situation that was demonstrated this week by the sole U.S. veto of a UN security resolution that called for a Gaza ceasefire without condemning Hamas. As Israel seeks to defeat Hamas in Gaza and free the hostages, to keep Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons while deterring the threat of its proxies in Lebanon and Yemen, and seeks a modus operandi in dealing with the new Syrian government, the cooperation and backing of the U.S. is crucial for Israel. But it's also challenging as the Trump administration diverges from decades of American foreign policy in the Middle East. One such unprecedented area of cooperation is a new aid distribution system in Gaza, operated by the American NGO GHF under IDF-provided security. Now, as mentioned, Hamas is doing everything it can to sabotage and discredit this operation. Here's what the IDF spokesperson, Brigadier General Efi Defrin, had to say about that.
I'm here in the city of Rafah. Right behind me, you can see one of the distribution centers we opened in the last few days. So far, we opened 4 distribution centers, and we are intending to open more of them. We already launched or distributed more than 16,000 packages of food to the people, in addition to more than 1,000 trucks already entered Gaza, loaded with humanitarian aid. Hamas is doing his best, is almost to stop us from doing so. He is spreading rumors, fake news. He is trying bluntly and violently to stop the people of Gaza from reaching those distribution centers. I urge you not to believe every rumor spread by Hamas. We will investigate each and one of those incidents and each and one of those allegations. We are professional military, and we will do our best in order to dismantle Hamas, to release our hostages, and to spread the population of Gaza from Hamas and from Hamas leadership.
Joining us now in studio is Robert J. Silverman, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, a lecturer at Shalem College, co-founder of the Inter-Jewish Muslim Alliance, and a former U.S. diplomat posted, including here in Israel and in the Middle East. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with this aid effort. Again, unprecedented cooperation between the U.S. and Israel here. Yes. As we're speaking, though, it has suspended operations for at least a day. Clearly, it is facing challenges. How do you assess how it's been going with this operation?
I think the Gaza Humanitarian Fund is a good, positive, confidence-building measure to what I hope will be an endgame for the Gaza war. But two thoughts here. Let me cite General Petraeus at the beginning of the U.S. experience intervention in Iraq. He asked, how does this end? I want to know how this ends. So my first thought is, we need to be patient. This will take time. The Gaza war and the humanitarian aid is one positive step forward in an endgame. I think a lot of us see the same things, which are that the IDF has a small standing army, reinforced from time to time. Right now it has 5 divisions in Gaza, right?
Right.
That can't continue forever because a lot of those are reservists who need to go back into the economy and to resume their lives. So Israel does not have the force structure to permanently occupy Gaza for a long time. For short periods, yes. For counterterrorism strikes, yes, but not for a long-term occupation. So it needs what everyone sees is some multinational, U.S.-led, U.S. is the only country that is organized to lead such a force, but it would be troops from other countries under a U.S. organized effort. That has to start.
Well, let me ask you about that. You said it has to start because, as I said, this aid effort itself, which is being overseen by an American NGO, is that a step in that? Do you see potentially this leading to what some have dubbed the sort of Trump plan for Gaza, which is a bit nebulous, but it has some of the outlines you just described?
I want to be positive here. This Gaza Humanitarian Fund, yes, it is executed and implemented by U.S. contractors.
Yeah.
It's funded, as my understanding is, by Israel.
Right.
Okay? So this is Israel. This is taxpayers.
Well, there's been some divergence on whether that...
Yeah, but I've looked into it.
Okay.
It's Israel funding it with U.S. contractors.
Right.
I've verified that.
Okay.
So it's confidence building because it brings in the Americans to at least private companies, but with some acquiescence of the U.S. government. The bigger step is, will the U.S. lead a multinational effort to provide a follow-on security force and government's presence in Gaza after the IDF finishes its mission? Now, we have to let the IDF finish its mission.
Right.
I want to remind people, the U.S. counter-ISIS campaign, how long did that last? 4 years.
Right.
2014 to 2018, okay? That took 4 years for the U.S. Now, for Israel, we're in a year and a half into the Gaza. Will it last longer? It certainly will. We have to have the patience to let the military campaign, but while the military campaign is finalizing, we need to see these steps, and the Gaza Humanitarian Fund is one positive.
Well, since you mentioned the length of the Gaza operation, of course, there are some, including some of the hostage families are calling for at least a more immediate ceasefire return. We did see, as we're speaking, the return of the bodies of 2 of the hostages, American citizens, Gadi Hagai and Judith Weinstein.
Yep.
Is the U.S., especially negotiator Steve Witkoff, on the same page as Israel here? Because it does look like the U.S. is pressuring Israel somewhat, let's say, to reach a hostage deal that it would at least include a temporary ceasefire.
Right. Well, I think we just have to wish the Witkoff team all the best. Their hearts are in the right place. They're working hard on this. The problem is Hamas. Let's be clear. Hamas wants to survive this. Right. Let me tell you how Hamas wins this war. By surviving. It's a pretty low bar.
Right.
And so that's their aim. And they, and for Israel, the bar is much higher.
Right.
But it's on the right path. We just have to be patient. the hostages are a daily concern for all of us. But it's not, as the Prime Minister has said, it's not the only concern.
Right. I want to shift, since we're talking about U.S. negotiators.
Yeah.
Steve Witkoff also involved in the negotiations with Iran.
Yes.
Again, we're getting sort of contrary signals from the administration here.
Yes.
Some reports that a deal would allow some nuclear uranium enrichment to the Iranians. We had a denial this week from President Trump.
Right.
But at very least, we're not hearing, for example, talk about the sort of Libya deal that the Israel would like to see, a total dismantling of operations. Yeah. Nor are we hearing about some of the other concerns that Israel has had, for example, the ballistic missile program of Iran or support for its proxies. Are the U.S. and Israel on the same page when it comes to an Iran deal?
Well, the U.S. has now entered the negotiations, what I would say the Iranian bazaar. And they're getting the Iranian treatment. But I think we have to all, in Israel and the international community, hold the U.S. to what President Trump most recently said, which is that no enrichment. Right. That needs to be the bottom line. Now, the Iranian counter, we have to understand their position, says, well, hold on. You know, we're entitled to, we have a right, a theoretical international right to enrich. But the reality is Iran, which has signed on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has been in violation of that treaty for over 40 years.
Right.
So, no, they do not have, they may have a theoretical right, but the practice is they have violated international agreements. They are not, they should not be, as a practical matter, allowed to enrich anything. Many countries import nuclear fuel and have civilian nuclear power stations, but we need to hold President Trump to that position. I think we have a problem. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu says, the window is closing. What does he mean by that? He means that last October, Israel took out Iran's air defenses, key air defenses. Iran is naked now. They're vulnerable to a strike. That's not going to last forever. Right,
and they are, as I mentioned earlier, reports they are repairing, rebuilding those systems.
Correct. So, and they talk about, we'll see if this happens, upgrading them to get the S-400s from Russia.
From Russia.
They talk about it.
Right.
Who knows? But what we know for sure is that this window won't last forever. They are completely open to, vulnerable to attacks. Those attacks are best accomplished by the U.S. because it has the size of airplane and the size of bombs that Israel does not have to take out Fordow, the deep, near Qom Iranian underground facilities. So we'll just have to see. This is an ongoing negotiation.
What do you think? These latest reports of a sort of consortium of nations that would be involved in enrichment, maybe in Iranian territory, it almost seems like a kind of workaround between.
Yeah, it's not a good workaround.
Well, let me ask you. And by the way, you were posted to Saudi Arabia at a certain point. The Trump administration giving the go-ahead, green light on a civilian nuclear program. I mean, let me get your feeling about this.
Well, first on Iran, yes, Iranians want. They're very good negotiators, and their latest ploy that as far as I read in the press, is that they're saying, well, we'll enrich with an international consortium monitoring in Iran. I think the bottom line is what President Trump has most recently said, which is no enrichment inside Iran. Doesn't matter if it's an international consortium. If it's inside Iran, it's a no. I think we just have to have a strict line on that. And it's because Iran violates such agreements. It has for many years.
And the IAEA report this week.
It says so. I mean, it's not my personal view. It's the international experts on atomic energy in Vienna have said that Iran flagrantly violates international agreements, cannot be trusted to do it. So I think the bottom line has to continue to be that one. And the threat of military strikes needs to be a real threat. And that includes, frankly, the U.S. Because Israel has a limited capacity to do this. The U.S. has a more effective one. And so we need to hear what the U.S. is prepared to do on the military side to incentivize Iran.
Right.
As for the Saudi, that's a different case. You can imagine that working. The Saudis have extremely long, I was part of it, and deep technical relationship with U.S. agencies, including atomic energy ones. For instance, in the U.S., facility protection is very well done in the U.S. Department of Energy, which protects our nuclear plants. They're already working in Saudi Arabia on protection of Saudi oil installations.
Right.
So I'm less concerned about that, frankly.
Right. I want to turn to finally to a country that was one of the allies of Iran,
Yes.
Syria,
Yes.
which is in the process of shifting its diplomatic stance.
Yes.
But clearly, though, here there is a divergence between Israeli and U.S. policy. The U.S. has rushed ahead. Trump administration lifting sanctions on Syria, reopening its embassy, going to give permission President al-Shah to apparently address the UN at the General Assembly. Israel has been saying go slow. Go slower. And of course, this week, 2 missiles fired from Syrian territory into Israel. How should Israel approach both Syria and the willingness of the United States to very quickly sort of reestablish its ties with it?
Well, yes, there are concerns, and Israel has them and should have them. But as they say in Hebrew, begadol, the big picture is it's a huge improvement in Syria from what it was.
Sure.
And we have to recognize that. And it's a big improvement in 2 fronts. First of all, Iran is not present, and Iran had a big and growing presence over time in Syria. So they used to have many small bases and some large ones in Syria. Those are gone. By the way, Russia's staff is still in 2 military bases in Syria. They haven't completely evacuated, but their equipment is gone. From the naval base in Tartus on the coast and from the air base in Latakia, you don't see Russians controlling the airspace above Syria anymore, as they did. So as long as Russia is not there to create mischief, Iran there to create huge terrorism problems for Israel, this is a positive. We just have to keep it going. Now, that doesn't mean you're complacent about the new Syria, but I think with the common goal that the U.S. and Israel have of keeping both Russia and Iran out of Syria, we have a good base right now. We just have to keep going at it. And those 2 missiles you talk about were fired by Palestinian militia groups. The Syrian government, which doesn't have full control of its territory, let's be clear. This militia that used to be a terrorist group that's now reinvented itself, you know, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, does not have enough sufficient forces on its own to control all of Syria. It has to work with the Kurds, with the Druze, with others to control. So it's a chaotic situation there, let's be clear. And Israel does have freedom of action in the south, within the Druze areas. But I think we have to be patient there and work with the new Syria to some extent to keep Iran out.
All right. Robert, I want to ask you to stay with us because we're going to shift our focus from this region now to the United States itself, specifically the security of its American Jewish community. That sense of security was severely rattled by last Friday's firebombing terror attack against a weekly solidarity march for the Gaza hostages, which saw a dozen injured with burns. Now, the attacker is an Egyptian national, Mohammed Sabri Soliman, living illegally in the U.S. after his latest visa extension was refused last March. Here's what some in the local Jewish community in Boulder had to say.
This is not the first incident of terror against the Jewish community in the last month, as we saw a couple weeks ago with the shootings in D.C. And we have seen 15% of hate crimes this year been perpetuated against the Jewish community, which only makes up 2% of the U.S. population. So the amount of disproportion there is indicative of something that I think we've been trying to ignore.
Well, I believe this was probably inspired by the DC attack that happened recently. I'm terrified to find out who gets inspired by this attack. I only pray that someone will be there who has the wisdom to know the right from wrong and the courage to act on what's right.
Robert, you, like me, grew up in the United States, a different time, I think, for American Jewry. I want to get your response to this shocking series of attacks now that we've seen.
Thank you, Caleb. Yes, 3 thoughts. First, I want to quote the best quote coming out of this sad incident, horrible incident in Boulder, was from an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor who was one of the 12 people who was burned. She survived. And her reaction, she was interviewed at the hospital, Barbara Steinmetz, is what's happening in our country here. But the first thing, the good news is the American Jewish community at the ground roots level is not cowering about this. For instance, in Boulder, my brother lives in Boulder, so I have on-the-ground information. There was a well-attended vigil last night. The previously scheduled Jewish festival, the annual festival in Boulder, will continue to take place this weekend. It's not a huge Jewish community.
Right.
But the first comment is that the American Jewish community is absorbing these hits, and of course they're upset, but they're not giving in to the terror. The purpose of these terror attacks is to intimidate Jews so that they don't gather, they don't be pro-Israel. They avoid gathering, but they're not. They're not. Now, the Boulder community is very liberal-minded, and another case in point is, the terrorists don't care if you're anti-Zionist Jew or pro-Zionist Jew. You're Jewish, and they're happy to kill you. They don't parse these political differences, and the Boulder community is one of the more liberal in the U.S. It's a college town. The second point is that the Trump administration is responding well, I believe, to take action measures about this. And we, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you have to salute that. Now, I'm a Republican, but I salute the fact that the Jewish governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, came out very strongly with a strong statement in support of what he called, before the media was calling it, an anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, and he's showing solidarity. The Trump administration is taking solid measures to deport people who have violated U.S. laws. We have to support that and perhaps take a measure like finally designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. I support that.
All right, Robert J. Silverman, thank you for joining us on ILTV Security Brief.
Thank you, Caleb.
And now a final word. Before moving to Israel 4 decades ago, I grew up in a United States that many viewed as something of a golden age for American Jewry. Anti-Semitism was on the decline, and violent attacks against Jews and their institutions seemed to be a thing of the past. No longer. The deadly shooting in Washington, D.C., and the firebombing in Boulder, Colorado are wake-up calls for American Jewry that they now live under the threat of potential attack at any time and any place. Unfortunately, the truth is that this is an alarm which should have been heard and responded to many years ago. Several are blaming the upsurge in Jew hatred on the events in Gaza, and it's certainly true the widespread defamation against Israeli actions there is partly responsible. But that only accelerated existing trends which were already there, fueled by the growth of social media as an engine of incitement and wider political trends towards polarization and extremism. This was already proven by the 2018 massacre at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. Now, this program focuses on security issues here in Israel and the Mideast, but it must also include those in the wider Jewish world, including the U.S. It's clear now that there should have been more thorough security measures in place at the Washington event and Boulder March, and that moving forward, American Jewry must take similar precautions that are seen, for example, in many Jewish communities and institutions across Europe. This may be a bitter pill to swallow for those like myself who once believed the threat of anti-Semitism would soon be no more than a distant memory for future generations of American Jews. But in this case, an ounce of prevention, and more than that, is clearly necessary to treat the disease of Jew hatred that simply has no cure. Thank you for joining us on ILTV Security Brief.